Volodymyr Zelensky, of course, was in Saudi Arabia ahead of the talks, but not involved in what was going on. But let's get his reaction. Volodymyr Zelensky.
The American side understands our arguments and accepts our proposals. I want to thank President Trump for the constructive nature of our team's discussions. Today, the American side proposed taking the next step immediately, establishing a full ceasefire for 30 days. This would not only apply for missiles, drones, and bombs, and not only in the Black Sea, but along the entire front line. Ukraine welcomes this proposal. We see it as a positive step and are ready to take it. The United States must now convince Russia to do the same. If they agree, the ceasefire will take effect immediately. Another key element of today's discussion was America's readiness to restore defensive aid to Ukraine, including intelligence support. If agreements are implemented, then within these 30 days of silence, we can work with our partners to develop concrete security guarantees that ensure lasting peace. Ukraine is ready for peace. Now Russia must show whether it is ready to end or to continue the war. It is time for the full truth.
The words of Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. Let's go straight to Kyiv. Our correspondent there, of course, Gulliver Cragg. Gulliver, good evening to you. Zelensky's saying it's up to the United States now to convince Russia to go along with this deal.
Yes, I mean, in Ukraine, the result of today's talks in Saudi Arabia really is being viewed as probably the best possible result that the country could reasonably expect. Effective immediately. We heard those words there from Mike Waltz, the resumption of US security assistance to Ukraine and intelligence sharing after it was suspended by Donald Trump after his disastrous meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky in the Oval Office. That was the number one objective of the Ukrainian delegation in Saudi Arabia today, to get the Americans to resume military aid to Ukraine, and they're going to do that regardless of whether Russia accepts the ceasefire and whether the ceasefire really materializes. Their second most important objective was to put the ball in Russia's court, and Marco Rubio used those exact words to show that they are willing to make peace and now challenge Russia to show whether or not Russia is willing to make peace. And I think the Russians now have a difficult decision to make, because they're the ones attacking at the moment. The Ukrainians are defending. It's a lot easier to agree to a ceasefire when you're on the defensive. The Russians, if they agree to a ceasefire right now, that means that their attempts to retake Sudzha, that key town that the Ukrainians occupy in Kursk region, they're on the brink of retaking it. They might have to stop if they agree to this ceasefire. They also have not yet achieved their key goals in Donbass of taking the strategic towns of Chasiv Yar and Pokrovsk. So the Russians will be loath to stop fighting now, while the Ukrainians are on the back foot. On the other hand, the Americans have made it very clear that they are going to put pressure on the Russians, and Donald Trump said that he very much hopes that the Russian side will agree to this ceasefire. So now the Russians have got expectations. Finally, the Ukrainians are perhaps about to see the Americans putting some pressure on the Russians. I mean, I think some people this evening are thinking it's almost too good to be true and wondering what's the catch.
Indeed. Is there any sense where you are, Gulliver, about what Ukraine might have to give up as part of this deal? What are the terms and conditions? Do we have any clue?
This is nothing like a final peace agreement. This is a step forward, as all sides seem to be describing it. Possibly there'll be a ceasefire. There's a lot of skepticism in Ukraine about whether there really will even be a ceasefire. But if there isn't a ceasefire, then the Ukrainians will have achieved one of their goals of proving, in a way, what Volodymyr Zelensky was saying when he was in the Oval Office, that the Russians can't be trusted, that the Russians at the moment don't want peace, that Vladimir Putin will not agree to a ceasefire, and that therefore the United States needs to put more pressure on Russia. Either way, it's kind of a win-win situation for the Ukrainians. If there is a ceasefire, yes, they're worried the Russians will use it to regroup and rearm, but they very much need the time to regroup and rearm as well if fighting is to resume later. And if there is no ceasefire, then they will have proved their point. But all the talk later on about a final settlement, about Ukraine possibly having to make territorial concessions, that's still some way down the line.
Gulliver Cragg for us in Kyiv. Thank you very much indeed. Let's continue the analysis.